He was active in the civil rights movements of the 1960s. He's been a public servant in the Rhode Island government, and now he's a candidate for the state senate in a special election next month. He says his highest priority is to fix the injustice of a broken educational system in Providence. He is Ray Rickman, and he is our guest today. More talk about education or real solutions? Let's find out. Welcome to the award-winning State of the State interview show, and I am your host for today, Mike Stenhouse. Mr. Ray Rickman, you are our guest. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You are a former state representative, former Rhode Island Deputy Secretary of State. In fact, when you held that position, it was the highest office ever held by a black Rhode Islander in our state's history.
Yes.
In fact, speaking of history, you are a great black American Rhode Island historian. Your primary race is next month to replace Senator Gail Golden, who resigned. You're among 5 Democrats. Your credentials to be a state senator?
So you just named maybe a fifth of them.
Okay.
I'm running and hoping for voters to vote for me because I am a doer. And I was on Benefit Street the other day, and I'm talking to a woman, and she thanks me. I painted 5 fireboxes last year. That's no reason to elect someone to the Senate, but I do those kind of things. They hadn't been painted in 40 years, and I got a RISD student, and we went out and we painted them. I only did 20% of the painting. I raised the money and all that.
That's still doing.
Asked the union, had to get the union to permit us to do it. Anyway, it was fabulous, and you see the fireboxes. So I've done 30 of those things. Sometimes they're important. I did got the money for a 5-way stop sign on Hope, Thayer, and Lloyd, where Brown's athletic fields are, because I saw a high school kid from Hope hit and killed. I talked to Buddy Cianci about it, and he said, you know, we need $76,000 and we don't have it. So I got myself elected state rep. First thing I got from Speaker Matty Smith, this was his district, by the way, out here. I've done I tell people I've planted trees in Israel. I've planted 3,000 trees in Detroit. I've only planted about 8 or 9 trees in Providence, and 4 of them are in front of RISD's administration building. Yep. Planted them 25 years ago. They're 35 feet tall.
All right.
I try not to be your typical politician. I'm not full of rhetoric, and I want to go to the State House, and I told you why. The school system was given to the state. I want to be part of the state to help fix the school district.
Right. We're going to get into education in just a few moments with Ray, because that is your #1 campaign issue. Now, it just so happened that today's Providence Journal headline highlighted this story right on the front page. You and your other 4 Democrat primary opponents. And I think a lot of politicians in this state are watching this race with great interest to see, because, you know, there's been a trend of the, quote, progressive bloc, right? Especially in the state Senate.
Yes.
So, and whether that will continue or not. How do you describe yourself? Are you part of that progressive bloc, or would you where would you put yourself on the political spectrum?
So I'm a really solid, slightly Eleanor Roosevelt Democrat.
Okay.
And which I know you want me to say it, so I'm going to do it.
Oh,
I am certainly way left of center.
Okay.
But I'm a practical person.
Okay.
The president of the state senate has the votes and the power. I'm not going there to pick at him. Also, there is this kind of agreement on the 3 or 4 issues that the progressives want the most, including abortion, to leave it alone. They want more. And I tell them all the time.
Who wants more?
The super new left.
Okay.
And I tell them, you'll get them when you have 51% of the votes.
Okay.
Until then, you won't. And you should be out in the street getting new senators, not messing with the man in charge. I'm not going to mess with the man in charge on any of those issues because I'm there for education.
Okay, we're going to get to that. So just I was going to ask you, you answered Eleanor Roosevelt, but would you put yourself in either a John F. Kennedy type Democrat or a Bernie Sanders type Democrat, or you want to stick with Eleanor? You want to stick with Eleanor?
You won't let up, will you?
No, no. I just want people to know who you are.
So in that article you read today,
Yeah.
on the question of taxing the rich,
Yeah.
I was the one, I said, it's a capitalist society. All those capitalists made a lot of money last year. My stockbroker, I barely have one, was telling me about people making 22% profit. They can pay an 8% increase, and the Senate and the House are very rational. It's going to be temporary, 3 years. So they'll lower it.
All right, so you just said something, just to clear, then I want to get to education, but
Yes.
so you agree that America should be a capitalist society and not a socialist society?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Wait, but we need to fix capitalism. You and I had this little discussion before. I'll talk fast because you want to move on.
Yeah.
People shouldn't make $16 million a year. They own McDonald's, and their employees working for $10 and living in basements. We calculated, economics professor at Brown calculated that owner, if they made $14 million, all of their employees could make $18. So shouldn't the 400 be quasi-happy, and then the super rich person only have 6 houses and 5 cars and buy all their 16-year-old kids whatever they want?
Well, of course, the question there is who's the angel that's going to set the appropriate line that we dare not go above, right? So that's a legitimate question, right? There's a line.
You can't
you're
live
setting.
on $10 an hour with 2 kids.
Okay.
Can't be done.
All right.
Wait, I'm sorry, it can be done poorly.
Agreed. You've been a pillar, like you were saying, with the fireboxes and the trees. You've been a pillar in your community for decades. Nonprofit initiatives. You've led book drives. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know you. Just for the record, Ray and I have a history. I know a lot about your great public service. But you were part of the civil rights movement. 50. Mm-hmm. You marched down in the South. Mm-hmm. You have the scars to prove it. Unfortunately, you've told me about them. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they're emotional as much as they are physical. Is education the civil rights issue of today?
It is equal to economics. You shouldn't work 40 hours a week and go home with $400 if you're lucky. And that destroys everything, including when you live in Providence, your ability to send your kid to parochial school. You can't do it. And most people making minimum wage, I have 5 or 6 friends.
So where's education fit into that?
I'm having trouble answering you because I'm up from poverty, and a lot of it has to do with education, and a lot of it has to do with my mother. My mother created mentors. She went to Wayne State University and walked into the science class and got us tutors. That's my mother. And I told you, you'd like my mother. She created baseball teams all the time, So we had esprit de corps and spirit in the family, and uncles who had money, and my mother knew how to make them do it. So we weren't hungry poor, but we didn't have any money because my mother knew how. And it was a different age. I had 5 aunts lived within 5 miles. You go on over their house and get anything you want, including old clothes. So it's a fascinating time. But we lived in a rough, segregated society. Rough.
This is in Detroit.
This is in America, but Detroit.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. I think economics and education, I wouldn't know where to put them. But I do know, and again, you're trying to run the conversation. I'm trying to say some things. Let me try this one on you. My favorite job in all the world is X-ray technician. You go to the class for 6 months, and you come out and go to Lifespan and get you a $50,000 job that goes to 76. And you'd say, why doesn't everybody do that? And you can learn how to be an X-ray technician. Because you have to quit your job and go to school full-time for 6 months. Mm-hmm. Nobody working at McDonald's can do that. And then on top of it, you got to pay them $14,000, which you don't have. This is a mess that we could fix. And if you're going to the schools, I'd be blessed to hear you go there, because that's what I want to do, because I think this is back to you in education. If you could get it, 9 out of 10, you can do better.
I agree. All right, let's take a look right at this short video clip, and then have you comment.
Okay.
All right, so they're gonna cut it here. This is where you say, I will always bear the scars. Never would occur to me that Providence would be failing marginalized students, and that's why I'm running to fight this injustice before we lose another generation of children. Ray, that was from your campaign, your campaign video, announcement video, and from your website. Just expound on that a little bit more.
I tell people, and I'm very careful about it, I've been a civil rights advocate all my life, and I'd like to stop being one because I wish this stuff would stop. And in that, you have brutality. And I'm talking about within an inch of my life. A Catholic nun saved my life. She brought a towel and wrapped my head and stopped the bleeding. And I always get a kick out of it. You know, she might have been the only Catholic nun in the whole county. Who knows? But that was America. And I had nothing you could do about it. And they beat me because I was the smallest kid. I was 16 years old, probably weighed 106 pounds. And they didn't beat anybody else. And I was lucky to live. Now, I go back to Detroit, and I go to the Greater Macedonia Baptist Church and speak to 2,500 people, biggest crowd I ever spoke to. And it just was amazing stuff to have survived that. Now, this is society at that time, 80 to 85% of black people could not vote. And so you see the difference. I always tell people the pluses. In Georgia, not only does a black minister get elected U.S. senator, but the black folks are the reason the Democrats win. And of course, black folks never get paid for helping the Democrats. I'm sure you agree with that. And Mr. Biden is trying to change that. He says, okay, you put me here. And by the way, black folks did carry Biden
especially through the primaries.
Through the primaries, and he wouldn't have been any place without it. And I love people who reward those who raised them up. So I'm telling you, America has changed a great deal. The man in the White House trying to help African Americans.
All right. Best way I think we can help is by giving them increased educational opportunities. I'm sure you don't disagree. I would say conservatives want to focus on the student, and I would say Democrats and liberals would want to focus on improving the system. Square those two for me. Is it about improving the system, the infrastructure, the teachers we have, or is it about the focus of actual knowledge we're teaching to the students?
So the child is sacred in all regards. You know, I joke that probably down to about age 12, people should be able to vote. Kids can't vote. And
you would argue for that?
I got to be careful. Certainly 16-year-olds.
Wow, okay.
You could figure out who you like. They do it in high schools for presidential elections. They let the students vote. Yeah. And why do I say that? Because God bless the child who has their own. And the politicians would be frightened of you. In Providence, the high school kids have been mobilizing and have a little bit of clout. So I think there's nothing more important than the child. So I'm in full agreement with you. Now, what does that mean? That's where we may not part company.
Let me ask you one specific there, if I could.
Yes.
Then hold your thought. So in a lot of ways, the educational system, and you mentioned unions earlier, support politicians who support them. That's when I say the focus on the system. And the students seem to be a second thought. Are you endorsed by any of the teacher unions?
No, but this is the most truncated election in the history of America.
True.
Endorsements will come 10 days before the vote.
Okay.
And would I like their endorsements? Yes. Why? I'm going to engage them. I hope you believe me. I'm going to spend 4 to 5 hours a day, all 14 months of this term, engaging everybody, including you. Let me tell you what I want from teachers' unions.
Yep.
I want to deal with the seniority problem. The worst teachers seem to have the most seniority. Right. They've been there, they're stale, they're tired, they do bad things, and they get away with it. Now, just like police officers, 90% of teachers are wonderful human beings. They are. And it might be higher than that. I don't want to get in any trouble. It might be 98%. We argue this all the time. Yep. But 1%'s too many. And they get away with it because the union protects everybody at the same level no matter what you did.
Right.
And I want the union to create an internal, inside review system. Every time a teacher is well, you can shake your head. It's never been done. We've never asked the union. We just throw up our hands. They ain't going to do it. We don't know they're not going to do it because just like cops, no cop likes a bad cop.
Do you believe in charter schools?
Wait, you're changing the subject, but I'll
let you. Unions oppose charter schools.
Wait, you're the host. I'm not sure teachers have been asked, unions have been asked to do the right thing. I think it's us against them, and then the union demands seniority and protection for even bad teachers because we haven't set up a mechanism to let them push the bad teacher out. I'm going to try it. As early as January for Dr. King's birthday, I'm going to have a confab, you'll be invited, and we're going to sit down and talk about how unions can help protect children more.
Are unions standing in the way of educational reforms right now?
Did the former governor stand in the way of educational reforms? Now, by the way, I'm not sure what reforms mean. In Providence, they've had 6 reforms in 22 years. They've had 8 school superintendents. I'm not sure we need reform. I think we need...
Well, a failed system doesn't need reform? You've called it a failed, broken system.
No. See, the same thing happens every time. You know, they bring the superintendent from Princeton, and they come in with the Princeton system. And Princeton's 10% the size of our system. So every reform I've ever seen was stupid. That's your first problem. So let me bring you down to earth. That's all I want to do is come down to earth. They did, Johns Hopkins looked at the system and said, a lot of teachers don't like their kids. And I talked to Johns Hopkins people on the side and said, I don't understand. What are you talking about? They said, well, there's a language problem with a lot of the Latino kids' mothers. And the teachers get upset. A lot of teachers get upset. Let me be careful. A lot of teachers. And they didn't specify what those numbers were, but they found it important enough to talk about it more than once. And we need to deal with Spanish. Yep. There's been the system, it houses 67% Latino kids, and we don't address that. So there's been no reform, what you're calling reform. So I want to do, my brother told me, my brother was dean of students in Detroit. He told me to be very careful because the right won't be happy, the teachers won't be happy, nobody will be happy. He says, bring these things up one at a time. And so I'm not going to go any further except to give you one example. Are you ready? My brother went to Friends School in Detroit, and it had glass walls every place, and all the rooms were 24 feet tall. And you felt all outdoors, and the kids would plant 4 pine trees every year, and it was a school surrounded by a forest. It was wonderful. I'm going to do that for Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School.
All right, I'm going to bring you practical policy.
Yes.
So there was a little bit of a debate last year. There was a bill to pass the Senate for a moratorium on charter schools.
Yes.
Now, when I say reforms, I think of giving families more educational freedom and options to choose the best school that they want to go to, even if that means private school. That would be me.
Right, private school that they can afford.
No, privates with public funding, private school choice with public funding.
Okay.
The charter moratorium passed the Senate. You're running for the Senate. It did not get brought up for a vote, I don't believe, in the House.
Correct.
In the Providence Journal, you said you would support a 2-year moratorium on charter schools. So, to me, that means you're not for reforms, because charter schools are one form of reforms. Tell me where I'm wrong.
I was in the legislature.
With regard to charter schools.
Here's where you're wrong.
Okay.
I was in the legislature. No one wanted to create charter schools. I was one of the leaders of creating them. And the agreement was 20 years, 20 schools. And let's see the reforms they can bring, what they can do differently. They've done a couple spectacular things. The lack of violence. You know, they're to be blessed from God for that. And the public schools are violent places. And I can name you other things charter schools have done. But they haven't been as innovative as promised, and I'm not.
Well, wasn't the idea these charter schools would do some new things, and then public schools would adopt them? Have public schools adopted any of those things, for instance, that have helped keep them safe?
Violence is one of the very first things on my agenda, because we don't have.
So what can we do there specifically?
Well, we don't have violence in the private schools. We don't have violence in the charter schools.
So what can we do in public schools?
You have a rule. If you frown at me badly, you have to go to the auditorium and sit down, and your mother has to come after school. If you threaten me, you get a day or two off. Because what happens in public schools...
Are you saying those things aren't happening in public schools right now?
Oh, my Lord, never, never, never.
Okay.
A famous baseball player, nothing. I have been... This is why I'm running for the assembly. You ready?
Go.
I took Steve Brown to lunch to tell him
ACLU?
Yes.
Rhode Island.
I used to be president of it. And one of my greatest achievements in life, I was chair of the committee that hired Steve Brown. Whether you like him or not, the man is steadfast, brilliant, dedicated. Anyway, back to business. I took him to lunch and I said, Steve, I'm going to sue the school system over violence, mainly at Classical High School. I've had 3 young men come to me and tell me how they're threatened, and every time I call the administration, they say, we can't deal with that. We have real problems. We have a kid whose nose was broken yesterday. All they did, these 3 kids, is threaten them all the time. This was their game. But
so more discipline is what you're saying.
Wait, this is not discipline.
All right, what is it?
You should not have to be worried about going to school, for starters, ever. Also, the violence can get out of hand with a murder of a student in front of the school by a stray bullet. And everybody, every administrator, every teacher in that school knew about the beef, and they did not intervene. The beef was 6 months old, and they never intervened. I want a codified law that says you must, when you offer to kill somebody, you're in trouble.
Okay.
And so if the private school and the public school and the charter schools can do it, we can do it in the public school. Now, you have to excuse me. I went to schools that were quality. Quality.
Even in poor Detroit.
In Detroit. When I was whatever. But as I got older, they were segregating. So they kept the schools for the white kids, and they filled the black schools up. I was in a classroom with 50 seats meant for 15. Yeah. And then you lose your whatever. The teacher loses her whatever, and you see the decline of the school. We can fix it all.
All right, we only got a few minutes left. A couple more topics. From your website, you say there is an immediate opportunity to increase school funding. I'm sure you're referring to the money that's coming in from the federal government. Fixing our schools, the physical infrastructure, the crumbling schools, we all know about that. Then you mentioned something, true wraparound services that address the underlying needs of our students. And that's a really interesting debate. Should we focus on teaching educational topics at schools, or should schools become a social services provider? And that costs money, and that distracts from education, some would argue. Put it all together, and then I got one more question.
So that should be a separate... Providence is a very unique city. It has no museum. It has 4 or 5 things. It has no library. No library, no museum.
What do you mean no library?
The library is private, believe it or not. The Providence Public Library is private.
I didn't even know.
And we have no health department. Boston has a health department. We need a
Is that the school's job, though?
No, no. I'm telling you
Okay.
about separate.
Okay, yep.
We need a mental health facility. We have the Providence Health Services, which is pretty good. And so we need to make that more structured to get in to help students, because the health services are really adult-oriented. I used to be on that board a million years ago, and I used to complain, we didn't like you unless you had cancer or something. And we need to be talking. You know, I've worked with hundreds of kids through the swim program mainly. Every 10th kid has an emotional problem. I'm not joking you. But can I also tell you, every 20th young person at Brown University has an emotional problem.
Yeah.
We've got emotional problems and we don't deal with them. So I want to build a brand new structure separate from the police to
Within the educational system?
No.
Okay.
Totally separate.
All right, got to move on to our last topic. We mentioned it, touched upon it earlier. It's a concept the unions will fight with every ounce of their energy, and therefore a lot of lawmakers won't go along with it. But polling in this state nationally show that underprivileged families want the freedom to send their kids to a better school if the public schools aren't working, which means public funding should follow, some level of public funding to follow a student to a private school of their choice. In any way, shape, or form, would you support public funding for some form of private school choice?
So I told you we should pause. And
That's just charter schools.
charter schools.
Going to a private school is a different topic. Come on, yes or no?
I'm going to tell you probably 2 years from today, and I don't duck. I don't care about what people think. I want them to think I'm going to do a good job and please elect me, but I'm not following the wind. And you're creating new idea and concept. God bless you for it.
No, it's not new across the country.
Well, it's new here.
Yeah, it's new here.
And does it get life? I'm not quick. All the time in the General Assembly, they bring something up the first time. I say, can we study this for a year before I vote on it? We're about to affect 300,000 people.
Not right now, open mind?
Oh, a total open mind, because we got a problem, Houston. 23,000 kids with bad education. And we've got to find a way out of this. I'm committed to it, no matter who needs to be pushed.
All right, 30 seconds. Look at that camera right there.
Yes.
Tell the disadvantaged family
Yes.
why you're going to help their kids and generations beyond them. 30 seconds.
The school system has failed, and this is true in Pawtucket and Central Falls and West Warwick. It has failed because they don't focus. So we know the 10 problems. You could rattle them off, and we don't focus on them. We talk about big, silly reforms. Providence, and this is not one of the 10, Providence doesn't have any swimming pools in its high schools. You talk about lame, bad athletic programs. Everything's not good. I promise to make improvements.
All right. Ray Rickman, a lifelong service to Providence, to this state. He's an honest man. I'll tell you that personally if I can put in a pitch. Thank you for joining us on State of the State.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time on the award-winning State of the State. Mike Stenhouse out.